On today's list, we're going to be going through 10 plants that actually eat animals. Number 10. The Portuguese sundew. You probably thought all of the animal-eating plants on this list were probably found in humid or exotic locations like a remote jungle in the southern hemisphere. However, that's not the case with the Portuguese sundew. This plant actually grows in soil that lacks a lot of the nutrients necessary for a plant's survival. You can find it in Portugal, Spain, and Morocco. So what can this plant do to make up for the lack of nutrients in the soil? Well, eat insects, of course. Just like many of the plants I have here today, the Portuguese sundew fascinates nearby insects with a tempting aroma. This then makes the insect get closer and ultimately get trapped by a sticky substance on its leaves. The plant then is able to dissolve the bugs by using its specialized digestive enzymes and absorbs all the nutrients that the Mediterranean soil fails to provide. That's what I call survival. You gotta do what it takes to stay alive in a place with limited resources, and the Portuguese sundew is an excellent example of that. Number 9. Ophyllum. A lot of plants on this list, or perhaps all of them, will make you feel like they were taken right out of a sci-fi movie. At least that's how I feel about the Triphyophyllum, which we can also call liana. This plant goes through a ton of stages, so many that it makes you wonder if this is actually a work of nature or a result of a crazy and evil experiment. During its first stage, the liana grows its leaves, which have the shape of ovals. But then when it starts flowering, it also starts producing long and sticky leaves enough to feed itself from insects. These leaves are capable of luring the poor insects and then catch them and even digest them. Toward the end of its life cycle, the liana's leaves are short and hooked, and they're about 30 meters long. But you don't have to worry about running into one of these in the wild unless you're in West Africa. And even then, it's more of an annoyance to us humans. Number 8. Rhorodula. The next plant I'll introduce you to is actually very evil. You see, it captures a lot of insects but doesn't actually eat them, and that's actually pretty messed up. There is an explanation though that will help us understand its behavior. The Rhorodula, which is originally from South Africa, has a lot of sticky hairs that help it capture insects just so a bunch of other insects called Pomeridia can come and eat the Rhorodula's catch. What's in it for the plant? Well, the plant can get all the nutrients it needs from the insect's waste. That is more than enough. In case you haven't paid attention to your science classes, let me throw a little term for you. This is what we call a symbiotic relationship, which is an interaction in which two beings benefit from each other. The Rhorodula catches bugs for the Pomeridia, and the Pomeridia gracefully gives its waste back to the Rhorodula so they both can coexist in harmony. Nature is indeed quite crazy. I should also point out the fact that there are a lot of fossils of Rhorodula in Europe, in the Baltic region to be more specific. Some scientists believe these fossils are about 40 million years old, which could indicate that these plants were more common back then. Number 7. Brocchinia reducta. What if I told you that the pineapple has a very twisted relative? I know it's hard for us to think of plants the same way we do of animals and human beings, but plants are also living beings, and just like us, they're also split into families. And yes, the pineapple does indeed have a carnivorous relative, and it's called Brocchinia reducta. Both the Brocchinia and the pineapple belong to the bromeliad family, which also includes Spanish mosses and many succulents with thick leaves. The Brocchinia has long pitchers that allow it to absorb and reflect ultraviolet light, which makes insects go nuts. This plant then releases a smell like many others on this list, and the bugs can't help but come closer. And just like that, this harmless-looking plant ends the lives of many insects in Colombia, Venezuela, Guyana, and Brazil. Experts in carnivorous plants were actually not sure this plant belonged to the group, but they finally learned in 2005 that the Brocchinia has those digestive enzymes that are common in animal-eating plants. Number 6. The Venus flytrap. Probably the most famous one that everybody knows about, this carnivorous plant is probably the one you've all heard about before. It's been the inspiration for a lot of horror and adventure movies that involve plants that can potentially harm humans. In reality though, these plants are not as big as you've seen them on the big screen or in video games. In fact, they're actually really small, and the diameter of the whole plant can be about 13 centimeters long. However, don't let their size fool you. They are still carnivorous plants and they behave as if they had a brain of their own. They can catch their food in their 2 centimeter long sticky traps. And they don't fall for debris or any fallen leaves. They'll only snap at the touch of insects and spiders, which will trigger the little trap to shut through their movement. This plant is native to the wetlands in North and South Carolina in the United States. Unfortunately, and kind of surprisingly, this species of plant has actually been listed as endangered by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, mainly due to population growth in the Carolinas. Hopefully they can come up with a way to preserve it, because I know it is a scary looking plant, but it deserves to live long. Also, it's very surprisingly popular. Number 5. Butterwort. This plant right here is named butterwort, and that's due to its huge leaves that look like they've been covered in butter. It is also known as pinguicula, which literally means little greasy one, and I can totally see why. These plants don't lure their prey with sweet smells, but instead they trick them by making them believe their leaves are full of water drops. But in fact, this is not the case. You see, it's not water, but a sticky goo-like substance that traps the bugs and slowly dissolves them through some enzymes. If you come near one, you can tell when they've had a meal, as you'll probably see some insect leftovers on top of the leaves after they've sucked all the meat out of their poor victims. This plant can be found in North, South, and Central America, but it is also in parts of Eurasia. Some Europeans have found that the leaves of the butterwort were good to promote healing in the sores of their cattle. They also have used it in Sweden and Norway to make fermented milk products. It's good to know that those leaves are not just good for killing insects, but I think I'll stick to my regular milk. Number 4. The moccasin plant. And I guess we couldn't leave a plant from Australia out of the list. After all, it's a very wild country where a lot of exotic species live, both animal and plant. So it makes sense that at least one of the plants on this list comes from there. And that would be the moccasin plant, which was first found in the southwestern part of this huge country. Once again, like most carnivorous plants, the moccasin plant releases a sweet smell that brings insects close to its pitchers, which, by the way, are shaped like moccasins, and in those pitchers that the insects get eaten and digested. It's actually a very torturous event, as the pitchers have translucency, which makes the bugs confused and knock themselves while trying to go through what they think is a way out of their suffering. Something odd about this plant is that it has features that make it more related to flowering plants rather than the carnivorous ones. But then again, some things in science can't be explained, and we have no choice other than enjoy and admire the twisted way in which everything functions around us. Number 3. The water wheel plant. The Venus flytrap has an aquatic version of itself, and it's called the water wheel plant. It doesn't need any roots, as it floats on the surface of bodies of water amongst reeds and rice, where it can catch small insects with its little traps. These ones, however, snap way faster than the Venus flytrap. They can react in as little as 1/100th of a second, which must be quite shocking for the bugs that end up becoming their victims. This plant has been found throughout different parts of the old world, and you can find it in Europe, Asia, Africa, and even parts of Australia. The plant spreads itself by sticking to the feet of birds. They carry it to a new aquatic destination. But today the plant is actually quite rare, and was already listed as extinct in some countries. Number 2. The tropical pitcher plant. I saved the best for last. At the top of my list here, I have the tropical pitcher plant. You might be wondering, does it eat humans? Of course it doesn't, it's too small. No carnivorous plant in the world has been known to eat humans, not even the hued Rafflesia. And that's not even a carnivorous plant, although people like to think so due to its size. However, the tropical pitcher plant can eat small lizards, amphibians, and even small mammals. So that's actually quite different to the insect-eating plants we saw throughout the video. This plant can feed from these animals due to the size of its pitchers, which can be a bit longer than 1 foot long. Digestion, however, is not a fast process, as it takes the plant around 2 months to process the meal. That is quite a long time, and there are more than 100 species of this plant, and you can find them in different parts of Southeast Asia, Australia, and even Madagascar. I guess they like that island lifestyle. And do you want to know a fun fact? The pitchers of this plant are used by monkeys as drinking cups, and that's probably the most creative thing I've heard all day, actually. Number 1. The cobra lily. Cobra, exactly. There's no better name to use for a plant that looks like a snake that is ready to attack. You can find the carnivorous plant on the west coast of the United States, in parts of Oregon and Northern Carolina to be more specific. Besides luring in bugs with a sweet aroma, which by now I'm sure you probably got tired of hearing about, the pitchers of this plant work in a way that confuses and ultimately tortures its victims. They have a lot of false exits that makes the bugs grow tired as they try to escape. While this plant is very popular and has been the subject of many studies, naturalists have not been able to determine how the cobra lily gets pollinated. I mean, what kind of insect gets a free pass? Clearly enough, there is an insect that comes to pick up the pollen from the flowers to help the plant reproduce, but no one really knows who the lucky one is. In California, the cobra lily is used for flower therapy, and it's said to help people who feel physically weak. I'm actually really surprised every time I hear people still get health benefits from carnivorous plants like this one, but I suppose stranger things have happened.